If you've ever stood at your own kitchen sink and felt the world tilt under your feet, you know the way ordinary sounds become dangerous. The hum of the refrigerator like a distant siren, the hiss of the faucet like a fuse catching fire. That morning began with the harmless clatter of plates and ended with a sentence that split my life cleanly into before and after. I am Stella Brooks, 65 widow, mother of 2 sons who were my map back to joy after grief took my husband. I live in a quiet one-story in Phoenix where the jacaranda dresses the curb in a lilac shawl each spring. The house is unremarkable to anyone but us. Stephen's first finger paintings are still thumbtacked behind a pantry door, and a scuff on the baseboard near the stairs still looks, to me, like the day my younger boy, Ivan, tried to ride his new suitcase down the steps. My life had folded itself neatly around these small reliquaries of family, and recently, around the rhythms of my daughter Araceli, and her son, my grandson Matthew, the 7-year-old meteor who orbits every room and leaves it brighter. That morning, the day opened like any other. Stephen left before the sun got comfortable in the sky, a thermos in his hand, the smell of graphite and blueprint paper clinging to his shirt. Matthew chased the school bus to the end of the block, waving like he was blessing it, and Aracel, dark hair, impeccable blouse, the kind of poise that looked sewn into the seams, leaned over the railing and called down with that soft, practiced warmth, "Mom, I'm going to take a quick shower." I called back, "Okay, honey," because that's what you say when the world is behaving and the stairs are just stairs. The landline rang. I dried my hands on my apron. "Mom," came Ivan's voice, bright, youthful, the voice of the boy who built airplanes out of cereal boxes and then, somehow, folded himself into the real sky. "Had a few minutes on a layover. Wanted to hear you breathe." He always said something like that, half joke, half sun poetry, and I always pretended to scold him for it before smiling so wide my cheeks hurt. We talked about tailwinds and coffee, the way pilots do, and I could hear airport life breathing at his back, rolling luggage, a woman's laughter, a gate agent calling for Then his voice dipped into a narrow corridor I'd never heard it travel. "Mom, something strange is happening." I glanced at the ceiling. Water was running. I could picture steam unfurling like a flag down the hallway. "Strange how?" I asked, still smiling because mothers know that a smile can sometimes divert a storm. "Is Araceli at the house?" I laughed. "Of course she is, sweetheart. She just went up to shower." Silence landed hard. I could hear him breathing, but it was the sound of a man making a calculation he doesn't want to solve. "That's impossible," Ivan said, voice lowered to a whisper. I had to lean into the receiver to catch. "I have her passport in my hands. She just boarded my flight to France." There are sentences you think will never be delivered to your doorstep. This one entered my kitchen and sat at the table. I peered again toward the stairs, at the unremarkable spindles, the shadow laid across them by the hallway window. "You must have the wrong person," I said, arranging my voice into a neat stack. "Maybe someone with the same name." Another silence. Then, Ivan's voice, careful, like a surgeon setting down a scalpel. "I went to the cabin to check, Mom. She's in first class. I saw her. She's sitting next to a man." They were close, like a couple. I heard my own breath. The house contracted around me. All at once, the faucet hissed too loud, the clock struck too hard, and the steam from the upstairs bathroom stopped. In that obscene quiet after the shower shuts off, you can hear the house. Remember, it is made of wood and nail, and the ghosts of arguments and kisses. The bedroom door opened above me. "Mom, who is it?" came Araceli's voice from the landing dot. Everything inside me rushed forward to hold the glass of my life together. "Just a friend," I said quickly, slipping into the living room to keep her from seeing my face look like it felt. "Ivan," I whispered into the phone. "I hear her. She's here. She just finished showering." "Mom," Ivan said, the word heavy with the certainty I had taught him to carry into storms. "I am looking at her right now." I don't know how I hung up. My hands had become strangers. The living room, the familiar couch whose cushion remembers, the exact shape of my hips, felt suddenly like a place I'd snuck into and might be scolded for occupying. My life, in which things had always been either explicable or survivable, acquired a seam I couldn't see how to stitch. Araceli descended the stairs in a light blue dress, hair damp and rope dark over her shoulders. She moved like someone who expected the floor to meet her, which is a kind of power. "I'm going to the market. Do you want tomatoes?" she asked with that easy, practiced sweetness. "Tomatoes," I said, as if the right answer to a riddle could keep the sky attached. She took the wicker basket and closed the gate gently behind her. I watched her go with a feeling I'd only ever known at funerals, the sense that the door had let out more than a body. I stood there for a long moment with my breathing loud in my ears, then did what women like me have done for centuries. When the world declares a state of emergency, we inventory the small things for clues. The family pictures on the wall had to be interrogated. Stephen and Araceli on their wedding day, her lashes casting delicate shadows down her cheeks, as if the sun itself was dedicated to her. Baby Matthew clutching my thumb in the hospital, we were both crying. Ivan in his uniform, lighter than air, heavier than pride. The day I realized a boy can grow beyond even a mother's imagination. They were all facts once. Photographs, ossify facts. Now the facts were entering an appeal. I made tea because people do, even when the cup is only a prop in a scene called Do Not Collapse Yet. When the school bus coughed Matthew back onto our block that afternoon, he ran into the kitchen with his breathless news, and I knelt to receive it like scripture. "Grandma, the teacher said I draw like a hurricane," he announced, eyes bright. We spread his notebook on the table and I promised him hot chocolate after homework. I was grateful for his gravity, how the planet of his 7-year-oldness kept me from spinning off. He flipped to a page and pointed, innocently exact. "Look, Mom helped yesterday. She wrote with her right hand and it looks so pretty. But today she wrote with her left, and it looks weird. It is a small thing. We barely notice it until it reaches out of the dark and touches your shoulder." I remembered a grocery list a week prior. The neat slope of letters written with the right hand, and then another note: cilantro, fish, limes looped with a left hand, unpracticed and stubborn. At the time, Araceli had laughed it off. Just practicing. Mom, and I, who understand mercy, gave it to her. But mercy, misapplied, is cousin to blindness. By evening, the house had collected an inventory of microanomalies, the way a coat collects lint. Araceli returned from the market holding the basket in her left hand. Given 100 dinners worth of memory in which her right hand held knives, combs, the dishcloth she twirled absently when she was thinking. She laid tomatoes on the counter with her usual competence, offered to make roasted fish my favorite, and moved through the kitchen like someone who had always belonged there. But when Stephen arrived and Matthew knocked over a glass, the woman standing at my sink tightened her mouth in a way that didn't match the other woman, the one who sang lullabies like a confession. "Matthew," she snapped, "why are you so clumsy?" Stephen's head lifted, protective. "It was an accident." "You always defend him," she said, low and flinty. "You make me the villain." The word hung in the air. Villain. You don't notice how a house is a theater until the dialogue shifts genre and you feel a different play begin. That night, I took an old, lined notebook from the drawer where we keep batteries and the scissor we deny the world. I wrote in the narrow hand I use when I'm afraid of how big the truth will look if I give it. Room, 3 p.m. Araceli left for market. 6 p.m. returned in blue blouse, irritable, left-handed again. It felt like carving into barquins meant to be read later. I fell asleep with the notebook open on my chest and a prayer with no words. Morning gave me sunlight like a bribe, and I took it. After breakfast, Araceli floated her sweetness down the stairs again. "Mom, I'll run to the market." The basket dangled from her right hand this time, as if some cosmic stage manager had whispered, "Continuity, please." I nodded like a woman forgiving the script and watched her through the lace curtain until she made the usual right toward the market. Then, without planning to, and with a certainty that arrived like weather, I tied my old shawl and followed. There are parts of every city that borrow silence from the desert and use it like currency. 2 blocks past the familiar stalls, past Mr. Johnson's bakery where he saves the best sweet bread for Matthew, the street narrowed into a seam of alley with reluctant light. Aracelino, the woman who wore her body like a borrowed dress, did not turn right. She turned left, then left again, and disappeared behind a wooden door, as tired as a burned-out candle. I stood still in the heat until the heat entered me. The door absorbed my stare like a secret committing to itself. I was a 65-year-old woman with a fringe shawl and a plastic bag of apples, clutched to my chest so hard they might bruise. I did not knock. I wish I could tell you I was brave at first ask. I turned around and walked home with the feeling that every step wrote the same haunting sentence. "You are not crazy." I'd barely lifted the latch of our gate when I saw her Araceli in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, a white blouse, a knife working through cilantro, the air bright with lime. I could still feel the shadow of the alley on my skin. "Where did you go, Mom?" she asked evenly, eyes too cool, like a lake that hides its depth. "For a walk." The lie felt like you feel when you say fine when you are not. That night, Matthew found me in my room with cheeks hot from crying I thought I had hidden. He wrapped his arms around my waist with that force only children trust you to survive. "Grandma," he whispered, "today Mom yelled because I dropped a pencil. Yesterday she hugged me for drawing a bird. I want yesterday's Mom." What is a grandmother but a translator between a child and the weather? I told him mothers get tired. I told him people are sea. I did not tell him that sometimes a sea is to seize. Insomnia rearranged the furniture of my brain. At 3 in the morning, I turned on the lamp, opened my notebook, and wrote the sentence I didn't want to invite into the room. Maybe they are not the same person. The words looked like an intruder sitting in my chair. I felt both ridiculous and finally, exquisitely sane. The next day I returned to the alley. If you are a woman of my age, you understand the power of doing the proper thing in the wrong place. An ironed blouse amidst peeling paint, lipstick beside a rusted hinge, a family photograph held up to strangers like a warrant. I approached a corn stand where a woman worked with the quiet efficiency of the perpetually needed. I showed her the picture from our Mantle Stevens wedding, day Aretheli, in bridal light. Us all so convinced. "Have you seen this woman?" I asked. The vendor squinted, then nodded, in that immediate way truth has when it's not sorry for what it knows. "Yes, she goes in and out of number 14. She pointed at the wary door I had watched swallow my certainty the day before. I crossed to it. I knocked, each rap a little more like a demand. It opened onto a room stripped to its bones. A cot, a fan that remembered better days, a smell of disinfectant that somehow made the poverty sharper. A woman stood there, and my mouth said the name my mind insisted on, Aretheli. She flinched like the name had weight. Up close, difference arrived on tiny feet, a tremble at the edge of the mouth, a quickness in the eyes that wasn't calculation but fear. She clutched a rag like a rosary. Before she could close the door, another voice came from inside, soft but carrying. "Isadora, don't hide." The second woman stepped into view, thin, composed, hair knotted into practicality, gaze the kind that meant, "I'm Lucy," she said, opening the door wider, not just with her hand but with her composure. "Please come in, Mrs. Brooks. You deserve the truth." I sat in a chair that had been honest for years. The woman who wore my daughter-in-law's face gripped the rag like a life preserver. When she spoke, her voice was gentle and afraid. "I'm sorry, I am not Aretheli," she swallowed. "My name is Isadora." Names, when they change in a story, drag the air with them. My hands went cold. Lucy poured water into a plastic cup and set it before me like a contract. Then she began carefully, like someone unspooling thread she had kept untangled for this day. Isadora was poor. The man on the cot was her adoptive father, whose cough punctuated the room with urgency. Once by accident or fate Isadora met Aretheli in a market. Two women, two faces that might have been printed from a single plate. Aretheli, Lucy said, had turned coincidences into an industry. She paid Isadora to stand in for her, a few hours at the house. A trip to the market, bedtime songs in a pinch, enough to knit a lie into a blanket. Money changed hands. Medicine was bought. A life that was breaking was taped together with the same notes that were breaking mine. "Why?" I asked, and the word was so full it barely made it through the door of my mouth. Why would she need a double? Isadora shook her head, tears gathering with a kind of shame you want to put your hand over so it won't be seen. "She didn't tell me, ma'am. She would just say when to come, what to do, and send me away when she returned." She glanced at Lucy, as if borrowing some of her spine. "I didn't want to hurt anyone, but we needed the money for medicine." Lucy looked at me then, with a compassion that did not excuse but understood. "I saw Aretheli once with a man," she said. "Very elegant. Charles Thompson." I'm not proud that I listened, but I heard the name. They were close. Isadora was in the car, waiting. Charles Thompson. The name sat in my lap like a colder water. In the airport, Ivan had said she sat beside a rich man. The puzzle began to show its picture. I set the cup down hard enough to make the water shiver. "I believe you," I said, and I did, with a relief that felt like grief's sister. "But I need proof, and I need to protect my family." Lucy nodded. Isadora cried another apology shaped like a prayer. Before I left, I asked one more question, in a voice that had put on Alma. "Who are you, Isadora? Not just what Aretheli used you for, who are you?" She took a breath and offered me the smallest, truest thing she owned. "I don't know who my real parents are," she said. "I was adopted as a newborn. All I have is me." The sentence followed me home like a stray that knew where food was. My notebook lay open on the table. I wrote what I had learned and felt. Each word tethered me to a future in which ruthlessness and tenderness would be asked to share a roof. That night, Matthew drew a bird that looked like Escape trying to learn how to fly. I smoothed the paper with my palm and kissed his hair, and he never knew I was choosing war with a grandmother's politeness. The following day, the alley gave me one more truth. Isidora's adoptive mother, small faded, brave, told me in a voice that trembled but did not lie that she had once been a nurse. In a nearby town, long ago, a poor woman had given birth to twins and could not keep both. One baby would be abandoned. She took the second child home. Isidora, the hospital papers showed, softened by time, showed a birth date that matched Aretheli's. The room spun. The world, in its cruel generosity, had given me a riddle, and the answer in neighboring sentences. Twins. I left with the documents in my bag, and with something else, an oath I could feel vibrating against my ribs. The path forward had shrugged and thundered. I would not let anyone use Isidora again. I would not let anyone use my grandson's idea of a mother as a costume. I would not choose peace that was only the perimeter of a lie. That night, I set a table like a stage, white cloth, the good plates, candles that held their fire carefully. I cooked Stephen's favorite chili and Matthew's beloved roasted fish, and I seasoned every dish with the knowledge that the next hour would redraw our family map with a heavy, black pen. Ivan came in quietly and kissed my hair. He had the look men get when they bring hard evidence to a soft home. In his bag waited a printed manifest, a copy of an e-passport log, times dates irrefutable as arithmetic. When the doorbell rang again, it was Isidora in a simple dress, her hands folded, her face identical to the woman I had shared my house and heart with except for the eyes, where Aretheli's had grown practiced. Isidora's trembled with uncamouflaged humanity. Matthew saw them both and asked in astonishment that sounded like wonder cracking, "Why are there two moms?" I didn't answer. Not yet. The candles flickered. We took our seats. The house held its breath like a cathedral does when a confession is finally about to be spoken. And I, who have stood at a kitchen sink and felt the world tilt, stood up to steady it, with the only tool I had left. There are silences that bless a room, and silences that bare its teeth. Ours had both. The candles made small, devout halos on the tablecloth. The roasted fish sent up a clean, citrus breath. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice, as if registering its objection on the record. We were 4 chairs and 2 truths. Stephen stared at Isidora, as if his vision had split and was trying to merge again. Aretheli tightened her napkin, the gesture precise and almost ceremonial, like a woman preparing to endure an opera she had not chosen. Matthew, bewildered and luminous, sat very straight, as if posture could help him understand. I spoke first because mothers do. When the house is drifting, before we eat, I need us to listen. My voice sounded older to my own ears, not because of time but because of assignment. Ivan set a slim stack of papers beside the salt, their corners aligned like soldiers at attention. He nodded to me once ready when I looked at Issy. She had folded her hands in her lap and there was a tremor in them that pinched my heart. "This is Isidora," I said to Stephen, to Matthew, to the heir. "She is not your wife, Stephen, but she wears her face." Aretheli's spoon clinked softly against the plate, a tiny bell of defiance. "This is ridiculous," she said. Calm spread over her voice like glaze. "Mom, you've embarrassed us enough." Stephen tore his gaze from Isidora and turned it, incredulous, to his wife. "What is happening?" His words fell carefully, like a man testing ice. I told our story in a careful chronology, because sometimes good sequencing is all that saves you. Ivan's call, the shower upstairs, the impossible passport, the writing that changed hands the way the moon changes mood, the alley with its reluctant light, the room at number 14, Lucy's name, Mrs. Jones' paper-soft history of twins, parted like 2 halves of a breath. While I spoke, Matthew's eyes moved from one adult to another, a child's silent arithmetic trying to sum people into sense. When I showed the hospital copy with the dates, when I said twins, Isidora flinched like a small animal at thunder. Aretheli did not flinch. She sat very straight and let the word pass through her like a train through a station. "That is not it. Stop." Stephen pressed his fingers against his temple. "Twins," he repeated. It wasn't belief yet, only rehearsal. Ivan slid the e-passport printouts toward him. Flight 247 to Paris, he said. Pilot Ghoul and boarded 10:07 a.m. Seat 2A manifest confirms. Gate recordings confirm. I saw her. While here, Araceli was upstairs, shower running. Araceli looked at the papers and gave a small, incredulous laugh that had once charmed me and now sounded like a key near the wrong lock. "You're really doing this?" she murmured, almost admiring the spectacle. Then to Stephen, in that coaxing, reasonable tone she had used on late bills and broken vases, "Love, you know me." He looked at her for a long time. He had loved that face. He had tucked it under his chin at night and pressed it to mornings. You could see him searching that face for the one he'd memorized, like a traveler holding a map up to a wild road. "Did you?" His voice cracked and came back raw. "Did you hire someone to be you, Araceli?" For a second, a fine crack ran through her composure. Then it sealed. "This is absurd," she said. "I am me. This woman is lying." She flicked her eyes toward Isadora with a coolness that made me want to throw my napkin like a net. Isadora's chair scraped back half an inch, the body's instinctive retreat from a cutting wind. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not to imply guilt, but to acknowledge the pain in the room. "I never wanted enough." Araceli snapped that blade again. "Stephen, send her away. We're a family. We don't have to entertain fantasies." I saw Stephen's shoulders gather, that small, masculine squaring that had nothing to do with aggression and everything to do with refusing to drown. He turned the passport log so it faced her. "Seat 2A, he read, voice steadying through act, if not through faith. "Charles Thompson into B." The name landed, a storm's first drop on hot pavement, the faintest sizzle. For the first time she glanced down, as if modesty and truth had arrived together by mistake. Then she did something I recognized too well. She chose escalation over surrender. "Fine," she said, lifting her chin. "Fine. I went to Paris. I went for work." She smiled, small and poisonous. "For work that pays more than blueprints and babysitting." Stephen's face didn't change. Only his hands did open, then closed, as if even fingers must choose sides. "And this," he gestured toward Isadora. "For work, to..." Something moved in Araceli's expression, then some fragile, human flicker quickly shuddered. "I needed help," she said. "It's not a crime to ask for help." Her eyes slid to me. "Your mother liked to monitor my every minute. I wanted privacy." "And the boy?" Ivan asked softly, and the gentleness in his tone carried a harder edge than shouting. "Did Matthew need to be confused by two versions of a hug?" At his name, Matthew straightened. "Two moms," he said again, small voice daring itself. It shattered me. I got up, moved to his chair, and laid a hand at the nape of his neck. That tender bracket where children still let you steady the world. Araceli's eyes flashed less guilt than annoyance at losing ground. "Kids adjust," she said. "Matthew is resilient." She pinned a smile to her mouth and turned it toward him. "Right, sweetie. Mommy loves you." "Which one?" Matthew asked, and the question was a bell tolling too big for his chest. Silence. Lucy stepped from the kitchen doorway then, the invisible hinge on which the evening would turn. Her voice was even, the steadiness of someone who had already done the shaking in private. "I saw you with him," she said to Charles. "You called each other honey." Araceli's eyes hardened. "Who are you to me?" "No one." Then, almost lazily, she delivered the last of her weapons. "Yes, I have a lover. Yes, he is generous. And yes, I am tired of living small in this house." She looked at Stephen without even the courtesy of tenderness. "I wanted a better life. I took it." The sentence fell through us like an elevator with the cable cut. Stephen didn't move, not a breath, not a blink. He looked like a man who had just been told his most careful structure had a flaw that couldn't be corrected. When he finally found his voice, it was hoarse, the throat's way of protecting a heart. "Then go," he said. "No fury, no theatrics, a clean eviction. Go to your better life." I hadn't known I'd been holding my breath until it left me in a long, old wind. Matthew began to cry, a thin, choked sound that made the candles quiver. I gathered him, small bird under my arm, and pressed his cheek to my shoulder. Over his hair I watched Araceli stand. She looked briefly not devastated, not even angry. She smoothed her dress. She glanced at Isadora with the pragmatic contempt reserved for tools that have served their purpose, and she walked out. The door clicked shut as politely as a lie finishing its sentence. We did not speak for a while. Lucy fetched water because the world insists on continuing to require small kindnesses. Stephen remained seated, hands at rest, eyes seeing a year forward and finding no shapes, then seeing a year back and finding the wrong ones. Ivan stood at the window and stared out like a man calculating weather. I rocked Matthew, murmuring without thinking the melody my own mother had used when the night pressed heavy solito lindo, the words, a soft ribbon. To Moms, he sobbed into my blouse, I want the nice one. It was Isadora who answered him, and her quiet was the most precise tool I had ever heard. She stepped closer, kneeling so her face was level with his. You deserve one mom who is the same every day, she said. I can't be your mom, but I can be Isadora every day. He looked at her with the 7-year-old's brutal wisdom. He searched her face for the thing children sniff out without learning. He found it, he hiccuped twice, then reached a hand toward her. She took it, not as a promise, not yet, but as a beginning. After I put Matthew to bed after, the long sip of water, the peeling off of small socks, the kiss to the hairline that fixes nothing but believes in fixing, I returned to the living room. The fish was cold and beautiful, a sacrament untasted. The candles leaned, exhausted. Stephen stood staring at the wedding photograph on the wall. I stood beside him. We looked at the younger versions of ourselves, as if they were strangers we needed to forgive. I didn't see, he said, each word, mind up, from grief like or, Mom, I didn't see, because you loved, I said. It was not an absolution so much as a diagnosis. Love is a splendid cataract. He closed his eyes. I don't know what I am without the story I thought I was in. Then we will write a better one. I did not know the plot yet, but I knew the genre. Recovery. Ivan touched his brother's shoulder. Pilot's guide on the ground. We handled turbulence, he murmured. You taught me that before I ever left the runway. Stephen exhaled something like a laugh and drew his brother into a hug that looked like men finding their old language. In the days that followed, life did what it always does. It dared us to keep pace. There were errands and appointments, the lawyer's receptionist with her efficient sympathy, the courthouse hallway with its scuffed floors reading 100 separate stories in their lusterless grain. Stephen and Araceli signed papers across a table, with a plant doing its brave best to survive fluorescent light. Araceli did not look up. She left with a man in a suit that made the air tilt slightly, and the smell of his cologne held in the doorway after they were gone like a final, unnecessary flourish. Custody was not contested. There was a check, there were documents, there was a hollow finality, as if sorrow had taken numbers and become administrative. Stephen came home from the courthouse, less a man humiliated than a man relieved of false weight. He set his keys down gently as if keys could learn a softer life. That first week was a training in the 1,000-minute rituals of single fatherhood, morning lunches, and the discovery that Matthew liked carrot sticks only if they are like little pencils, evening homework, and the bracing realization that second-grade math has acquired an alarming number of words. Stephen learned the exact distance between trying to be both parents and being a very good one. He failed and got up and failed better and got up better. Isadora did not disappear back into her alley. At first, she came cautious, as if walking on someone else's rug. She knocked before letting herself be asked in, even when I had texted, "Please come," a courtesy that told me more about her heart than any confession could. She brought soup in dented containers and small bouquets of daisies that looked like hope without vanity. She learned the squeak in our back gate and the place Matthew dropped his backpack by muscle memory. She cleaned up after dinner with a gentleness that was not servitude but gratitude for having a place where the sponge belonged. There was a Sunday when I found the two of them, Isadora and Matthew, at the dining room table making birds from construction paper. "Show me yours," she urged. "No, not like mine, like yours." It was the kind of sentence that makes a child grow evenly. When he called out, "Mama Isadora, look," my breath hitched. She froze, too, not from offense, but from awe, as if a title had flown across a room and perched on her shoulder for a second as a test. She did not reach for it. She smiled, eyes glossed, and said, "Let's glue the wing higher." Stephen watched all this with a care that had nothing to do with suspicion and everything to do with stewardship. He moved through his days with a new cadence, the slow return of a man who discovers he can trust the ground again. One evening, after Matthew had fallen asleep, sprawled starfish-wide across the couch, Stephen stood in the doorway to the kitchen where Isadora and I were washing dishes. "Stay," he said simply. It wasn't a command. It was a request to the world. Isadora looked to me the way a person raised by absence looks to anyone who has offered them a home, as if to ask permission to be happy. I nodded. "Stay," I echoed. We'll figure out the rest. The rest arrived like weather, some days gentle, some days with a stubborn drizzle. There were nights when Matthew cried himself to sleep for reasons he couldn't name. Isadora learned to sit beside him and hum without words, an old tune that wasn't a lullaby so much as a promise that someone was listening. There were afternoons when Stephen came home, hollowed by a blueprint that wouldn't hold, and found Isadora had left him a cup of tea at the exact temperature a man can be comforted by. There were Saturdays when Ivan was between flights and came by with a model plane, teaching Matthew how lift works, using a paper wing and a hairdryer. We laughed more quickly than before. Not because the grief had lessened, but because joy had decided it would not wait for permission. I kept my notebook, not as a ledger of suspicion anymore, but as a chronicle of repair. I wrote down the day Matthew stopped asking for the other mother. I wrote down the Tuesday when Stephen made 3 dinners in a row that were not noodles. I wrote down the afternoon I found Isadora in the garden, clipping dead roses with a look of concentration so earnest it made me cry, because love is like that, half gardening, half prayer. 2 weeks after the divorce papers were stamped by a board clerk who had stamped thousands, Stephen asked me to meet him and Isadora on the porch. The sky had done that phoenix trick of turning every color a body has ever blushed. He stood there holding a small ring asleep in its velvet bed. He had cut his hair shorter, as if to begin fresh at the scalp. Isadora wore a dress so plain it became expensive by virtue of how well it fit her life. He knelt, not for show, for gravity. "You brought light back," he said to her, voice raveling a little on the last word. "Not flashlight. Will you? Would you be my wife? Would you be Matthew's home?" Isadora's hands flew to her face the way a baby's does when startled by love. She looked at me, and I did the only thing that mattered. I smiled the permission my mother had never gotten to give me. "Yes," she said, the words spilling out like water finding its course. "Yes." The wedding was small, because healing doesn't like a crowd. We tied red roses to the fence out back and set folding chairs into obedient rows and asked Mrs. Collins to bring her lemon bars and Mr. Johnson to bring the sweet bread. Matthew loved as if the earth had invented sugar just for him. Ivan took a day between flights and stood beside his brother with pride, loud as brass. Lucy cried quietly, in the back row, which felt to me like the world apologizing through a friend, when I watched them say, "Thou Stevens, steady, Isadora's, tremulous." Matthew, solemn, in a too-tight vest that made him look like a banker in a fairy tale, did not cry the way people do at weddings, because they are moved by pageantry. Cried because I had watched the set collapse and the actors forget their lines, and somehow, here they were improvising something better, and the audience was us, and we believed them. Life after a fraud does not return to normal. It graduates into honesty. Isadora did not upgrade her dresses or her heart. She kept both simple and durable. She learned Stephen's blueprints as if they were love letters, in a language she could acquire, asking questions that made him consider more generous answers. She sang Cielito Lindo to Matthew at night, soft, careful, never to replace what had been, but to mend what could be mended. She called me Mom once by accident and then blushed until I convinced her that accidents are sometimes the truest things we do. And me. I learned a new quiet, the kind that doesn't have to listen for footsteps that aren't true. Evenings, I sat on the porch and let the breeze move the lace curtain more than once, because the breeze owed me. Inside, I'd hear Matthew narrating his own drawings, Stephen tapping pencil to drafting paper in calm concentration, Isadora's spoon circling a pot like a planet. It sounded like a house, a real one. Finally, on a late Wednesday, when the air smelled faintly of rain that would not come, I pulled out the notebook where my first note had read like an indictment. I wrote a new line. Truth set us free, but not from each other, into each other. Then, because I am my husband's wife still in the ways that count, I added the words he loved to say whenever our boys ventured into a risk that frightened them. Go on. Courage loves company. The channel grew, as channels do when a story tells itself true. I began speaking into the camera, not with outrage but with a grandmother's clarity. Not to take revenge, but to give language to the women who were still holding their breath at kitchen sinks, while upstairs water ran that shouldn't. I told them what Carol told me over coffee, that doubt is not disloyalty when it protects a child. I told them what Lucy showed me, how witnesses can be salvation if they dare to be. And when I finished each story, I asked my viewers the question that had turned my life like a key. If you were me, if you are me, do you keep peace by keeping quiet, or do you make peace by speaking? The answers flooded in from everywhere. Names hidden, courage, naked. I read them aloud to Matthew sometimes, and he would say, with the magnificent arrogance of a healed child, "Tell them, we chose speaking, Grandma. Tell them it worked." One evening, long after the house had turned its lamps low, I felt a new steadiness in my bones. I went to the porch and looked up. The jacaranda had not yet dressed the street in purple. It was biding its time. Inside, Isadora tipped a cup of tea onto a saucer for Stephen, and he leaned down so she could kiss his forehead without reaching. Matthew argued quietly with a comic book about the laws of physics. The refrigerator hummed its faithful hymn. The door to our home, the same one that had clicked shut behind a woman who left, was now simply a door. I think that is what we mean when we say, the truth sets you free. Not that it lifts you into some glittering skyline, but that it puts you back, with exquisite accuracy, into the life that was yours all along, except now, you can claim it without lies. If you ask anyone who has lived through scandal, they'll tell you the hardest part isn't the explosion, it's the echo. The blast fades, the echo stays, reshaping every ordinary noise that follows. For weeks after Araceli's departure, our house moved in slow reverberation. Morning, aftermath at dawn. The neighborhood returned to its old schedule. Sprinklers whispered. Across lawns, the mail truck rumbled. Dogs debated over fences. But inside, sound had changed its allegiance. Stephen brewed coffee with the care of a chemist, avoiding a reaction. Matthew ate cereal as though crunching too loud might summon ghosts. And me. I learned that healing begins the same way suspicion did. By paying attention. I ironed shirts that no one had asked me to iron. I watered plants that didn't need water, just to hear the faint hiss of life going on. Every motion was an argument against despair. Ivan flew again 2 days later, duty sky, and rhythm anchoring him. Before he left, he kissed my cheek and whispered, "Call, if the silence gets too loud." That line stuck to me like a charm. Stephen, and the blueprint of guilt. Stephen's guilt arrived disguised as diligence. He began sketching new designs late into the night, wide-windowed homes that let in more light than walls should allow. I'd find crumpled sheets by the trash, faint graphite ghosts of the life he thought he'd planned. One evening, I placed a cup of chamomile beside his elbow. "Still awake?" I asked. He gave a hollow laugh. "Trying to design something that doesn't collapse." "Start with yourself," I said. "You're the only foundation that matters right now." He looked up, eyes rimmed red. "I keep replaying every moment I thought she was just tired, or distant. What kind of architect misses the cracks at home?" "The kind who was busy holding up the roof for everyone else," I replied, and for the first time in days, he let the tears come soundless, slow. The blueprint finally rinsed clean. Matthew's questions. Children grieve in shapes, not sentences. Matthew drew 2 stick-figure moms on notebook paper, one smiling, one frowning. He handed it to me solemnly. "Grandma, which one do I keep?" The question broke something gentle in me. I knelt. "You keep the one who stays kind, no matter what she's called." He studied the paper, then tore it down the middle and handed me the sad half. "You can keep this one, Grandma. Maybe she'll learn." From that day, he started calling Isadora Mama Isi. She flinched the first time, then melted like ice meeting sunlight. Isadora's shadow workshake carried her own ghosts quietly. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at her reflection, touching her cheek as if apologizing to it. Once I found her folding laundry in perfect halves, whispering names under her breath, perhaps the names of the parents she never knew. When she cooked, she hummed old ranchera tunes I didn't recognize. The house inhaled those melodies gratefully. They erased the sterile hum of loneliness. One night after Matthew's bedtime, she confided, "I keep dreaming she comes back, not to hurt us, just standing at the gate, asking me to forgive her." "What would you do?" I asked. "I'd open the gate," she said, "but I'd keep the chain on." Her words carried the wisdom of the wrong mercy, tempered by memory. The letter. Month later. A thick envelope arrived from overseas. The handwriting on the front, elegant slanted, was unmistakable. Araceli. Stephen hesitated to open it, so I did. Inside was a short letter and a bank transfer slip. "Stephen, I know you hate me. Don't bother finding me. You won't. Charles and I have moved where no one cares about past names. The money is for Matthew's schooling. Tell him I'm happy, even if it's a lie he needs." Stephen read it twice, then folded it once and slid it beneath the drawer liner. "Let her vanish," he murmured. "That's her truest gift." We never spoke of it again. Community whispers Phoenix neighborhoods run on gossip the way desert plants run on dew. For a while, the whispers stung Mrs. Brooks's perfect daughter-in-law, gone abroad with a millionaire. I faced the murmurs with steady eyes and a grocery cart. People tire quickly when you refuse to flinch. Eventually, they replaced rumor with praise. Isadora's so good with Matthew. Stephen looks better. You always keep your yard lovely. Reputation, like soil, can be turned over. Renewal by spring. Laughter returned cautiously, like birds testing a new branch. We repainted the living room, a pale cream. The old wedding photo came down. In its place, we hung Matthew's drawing of a house with 3 smiling figures and one sun that looked suspiciously like a halo. Sometimes I caught myself humming while dusting, realizing mid-note that joy had slipped back in without asking permission. The visit to number 14, I went once more to the narrow alley, not for confrontation, but closure. Number 14 still sagged beneath the same rusted tin roof. Lucy had moved away. The old man's cot was gone. Only a new tenant stood in the doorway, broom in hand. "Isadora?" I asked. The woman shook her head. "She left months ago. Said she was going to start a new life with family." I smiled. She did, walking home. I realized the alley no longer frightened me. It was just another street, emptied of its secret. The second ceremony, when Stephen and Isadora married, we called it a wedding. But months later, on their anniversary, Matthew planned his own second ceremony. He drew invitations with crayons, each guest represented by a stick figure holding a balloon. Under the backyard jacaranda, he declared, "Now you're really married, because this time everyone's happy." He pressed 2 paper rings onto their fingers and kissed Isadora's cheek. The petals fell around them like applause. A house that breeds Avignons settled differently now. Stephen read stories. Isadora mended small things. I knitted under the porch light while Matthew chased fireflies he believed were stars that forgot their bedtime. The air no longer carried ghosts, only the soft exhale of a house that had forgiven itself. There's a peculiar peace that follows, revelation and almost holy stillness, but it doesn't last. Once truth has cracked open the world, silence feels like betrayal. That's how I came to tell my story out loud. It started quietly, as all storms do. The seed of a story. One evening, while washing the dinner dishes, I caught my reflection in the window hair. Silvered eyes, lined, but alive. I thought of how close I had come to losing everything to a lie. I thought of all the mothers who would never know they were living with one. Carol, my old friend, called around that time. "Stella, remember what you said when this started, that you'd write it all down someday." "I've written enough," I told her. "Maybe not for you," she replied, "but for someone else who doesn't yet know she should start noticing." That night, I opened the old notebook, the one that began as my record of suspicion and began again on a clean page. But this time, I didn't write times and behaviors. I wrote feelings, the weight of doubt, the smell of fear, the way love can blind even a mother who swore she'd never miss a thing. The words came fast, as though they'd been waiting. The first recording Yvonne suggested I record it. "Mom, people listen to stories while they drive, while they cook. You could reach thousands." "I'm no actress," I protested. "You're better," he said. "You're real." He set up his camera on a small tripod in the living room. The red light blinked like a heartbeat. My first take was awkward, too careful, too polite. I was trying to protect the past, even as I was retelling it. On the second take, I stopped performing and began remembering. I started the way truth always starts, with disbelief. My youngest son, a pilot, called me one morning. When I finished, Ivan's eyes were wet. "It's not just your story, Mom," he said softly. "It's everyone's who's ever felt crazy for seeing what's right in front of them." We uploaded it to a small storytelling channel. I didn't expect much. Within a week, it had 500,000 views. The comments came in languages I couldn't read. A woman from Poland wrote, "My mother went through the same." A man from Texas said, "This reminded me of my grandma. She saved our family too." I read them until the screen blurred. People weren't just listening, they were confessing. It turned out the world was full of women like me, keeping their quiet notebooks, waiting for permission to trust their own eyes. Stephen saw the response and said, "Mom, you gave our pain a job." The interview local news called next. They wanted a segment on the Phoenix family mystery. I hesitated. Fane was a strange visitor, but Isadora said gently, "If one woman locks her door a little sooner because she heard you, it's worth it." The interview was filmed in our garden. The jacaranda bloomed behind us. the same tree that had once shaded our heartbreak. Mrs. Brooks, the reporter asked, how did you find the courage to confront the truth? I looked into the camera and said, I didn't find courage. It found me the moment I realized silence was protecting the wrong person. That line would later be quoted everywhere, from podcasts to online essays, but I hadn't meant it to sound heroic. It was simply the truth. The return of Ghost's public attention has a way of stirring what should rest. 3 months after the interview aired, a plain white envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single photograph: Artheli, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, hand in hand with Charles. Across the bottom, written in looping cursive, you got what you wanted. Don't look for me again. For a moment, the old tremor returned, the instinct to doubt, to fear. Then, I noticed something. In the photo, she was smiling, but her eyes weren't. I placed it in my notebook, not under evidence, but under closure. I whispered, be at peace, wherever you are. And I meant it. The weight of recognition invitations poured in after that. Podcasts, magazines, conferences about family psychology. Ivan joked that I'd become the detective grandmother of Phoenix. But fame was never the point. What mattered were the letters, the ones that arrived in trembling handwriting or careful emails from strangers. Because of you, I trusted my gut and found out my husband was living a double life. Your story helped me forgive my sister. You made me brave. Each message felt like someone lighting their own candle from mine. Stephen's restoration. With time, Stephen began to rebuild not just his career, but his sense of self. He opened a small firm specializing in sustainable housing, and he named it Twin Light Designs. When I asked why, he smiled faintly. Because light has two sources, Mom, the one that shines, and the one that reflects it back. Isadora worked as his office manager, though everyone quickly realized she was also his compass. Their partnership was seamless, not because they were flawless, but because they had survived the same storm and learned to read the weather. At home, Matthew grew into a kind, observant boy with an artist's hands. He never talked much about his birth mother, but one afternoon he told me, Grandma, I think people come in pairs, sometimes one to break you, one to build you. I hugged him tightly. And which one am I? He grinned. You're the builder's blueprint. The speech, the biggest turning point, came a year later when I was invited to give a talk at a women's resilience conference. Standing backstage, I thought of all the versions of myself that had led here: the trusting mother, the suspicious one, the investigator, the storyteller. I carried them all to the podium. I began with the same line. Ivan had heard through the landline that morning. My younger son, a pilot, called me one morning and said, Mom, something strange is happening. You could feel the room lean in. By the time I reached the part where I realized my daughter-in-law had a double, there were tears, gasps, even laughter at the absurdity of it all. But when I ended, silence fell, not heavy, but reverent. Then applause rose like rain. Afterwards, a young woman approached me. Her hands were trembling. Mrs. Brooks, she said, my mom was never believed. I wish she could have heard you. I took her hands. Then tell her story now, I said. That's how she hears you. The book. It was Carol who convinced me to turn my notes into a book. Write it as if you're talking to your own reflection, she advised. So I did. The House with Two Daughters-in-Law came out the following spring. It wasn't just memoir. It was a map for anyone navigating deceit and rediscovering trust. It reached bestseller lists I didn't know existed. People called it cathartic, but for me, it was exorcism through ink. The letter from Isadora. One quiet night, long after the book tour, I found a note on my pillow in Isadora's tidy handwriting. Mom, thank you for giving me back a name that isn't borrowed. For the first time in my life, I'm not pretending to be anyone else. Love, your daughter, Isadora. I cried then, the way you do when tears stop being pain and start being gratitude. That night, I dreamed of my husband, Raphael. He was standing in the garden, smiling, saying what he always did when I doubted myself. The truth will set you free, Stella. When I woke, I whispered back, it did. Raph, it did. A year and a half after the storm had passed, I had begun to mistake calm for permanence. The house hummed with ordinary joy: Matthew's laughter, Stephen's steady footsteps, Isadora's songs in the kitchen. But peace, I've learned, is not a guarantee. It's a truce renewed daily, breakable by the smallest paper envelope. That morning, I was pruning the roses when Ivan's car pulled up. He stepped out in uniform, the desert sun flashing across his pilot wings. Mail for you, Mom, he said, waving an envelope. Came through the airline's forwarding service. The return address was Paris. I didn't open it right away. The handwriting slanted, graceful. Undeniably, hers was a ghost's knock. It took 3 hours, 1 pot of tea, and 2 false starts before I finally slit the edge. Stella, you once said the truth sets people free. I laughed at that. But freedom is not what I found, it's emptiness. Charles left. He took the money, the promises, and the name I borrowed. I have no one. I think about Matthew every night, though I know I've lost the right to call him mine. If you can forgive me, send me one word back, yes. I won't ask for anything more. Araceli, my hands trembled. The air itself felt undecided, part forgiveness, part fury. The family's debate that evening. We sat around the table that had once been a courtroom. I read the letter aloud. Stephen listened silently, fingers tracing the grain of the wood as if searching for strength in its rings. Isadora's face was pale, torn between empathy and the ache of betrayal. Ivan muttered, "She burned every bridge, and now she's cold." I took a breath. "She's asking for forgiveness, not a home." "Same thing," Stephen said quietly. "Forgiveness gives her power again." Isidora shook her head. "Maybe not. Maybe it just gives her peace." Matthew, now 8 and wise beyond measure, looked between us. "Grandma," he asked, "if we don't forgive her, does that make us bad too?" Silence. A child's questions always find the heart of the matter. The trip to France 3 weeks later. I found myself on a flight to Paris with Ivan beside me. He tried to protest at first. "Mom, you don't owe her anything," but the resolve in my eyes silenced him. From the window seat, clouds stretched beneath us like an endless field of white forgiveness. When we landed, the city's gray winter air carried the weight of a confession waiting too long. We found Araceli in a modest hostel near Montmartre. She opened the door slowly. Her beauty was still there, but dulled, edges frayed. Life had spent her extravagantly. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking on the word she no longer had the right to use. I looked at her for a long time, really looked. The twin lines beside her eyes, the tremor of remorse. Then I said, "I'm not your enemy, Arith, but I can't be your shelter either." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I don't want shelter, just forgiveness." So I gave her what she asked for. Not absolution, not excuses, just the truth wrapped in mercy. "I forgive you," I said, "but you must forgive yourself next. That's the harder one." She nodded, sobbing. "Can I see Matthew someday? When he asks for you?" I said gently. "Not before." We left her there, standing in the thin Paris rain. A woman both punished and freed. The return back home. The jacaranda was in full bloom again. Stephen met me at the gate. "Did you get your closure?" he asked. "Closure is overrated," I said with a weary smile. "But I got understanding. That's better." When I told Matthew that his other mother was safe but far away, he asked, "Did you hug her?" "Yes," I admitted. He thought for a moment. "Good. Maybe she needed it." And just like that, a child finished what adults could only debate. The legacy months later. Araceli's final letter arrived not from Paris, but from a rural convent in southern France. "I've started helping children learn to read. It's quiet here, and I can breathe again. Thank you for not giving up on my soul." No request, no signature, just peace. I placed that letter in the same notebook that had once documented deceit. The last entry I wrote beneath it read, "The same ink that records lies can also preserve redemption." Full circle years passed. Gently after that, Stephen and Isadora built a life rooted in gratitude, not glamour. Ivan rose to captain and often joked that our family had taught him more about turbulence than aviation school. Matthew grew into a teenager with the steadiness of his father and the empathy of both his mothers. On my 71st birthday, he surprised me with a gift-framed map of the world, dotted with pins. Each pin marked a place where someone had written to me saying my story gave them courage. "Grandma," he said, "look how far your voice flew." I smiled through tears, and it all began with a phone call. That night, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset melt into the horizon, I felt my husband's presence again. "The truth will set you free," he had said. "Yes, but it also sets others free, one story at a time." The world had called me a victim, then a heroine, then a storyteller, but I knew what I really was, just a woman who refused to stay silent when love disguised itself as deceit. Time didn't erase what happened, it translated it. The pain that once screamed in our house had softened into a memory that spoke in whispers. Years folded over like pages in a worn book, and each of us found our chapter to live. Stephen and Isadora built something simple and sacred. Their firm, twin-like designs, grew from sketches at the kitchen table into a respected name across Arizona. Houses that welcomed light became their signature reach blueprint, a metaphor for transparency. Each window a silent promise that no shadows would be allowed to rule again. Ivan became a captain. His flights now crossed the same skies that once carried his fateful call. He often joked, "Every time I see Paris below me, I remember how Mom solved a mystery that spanned continents, and me. I became something I never expected, a storyteller with an audience that stretched beyond borders, beyond language." The channel of courage, what began as one video recorded nervously in a living room, had turned into a movement. The True Hearts Journal channel reached millions of viewers across the world, women, men, children, anyone who had ever questioned what they were told to believe. They didn't just come for stories of deceit and redemption, they came to feel less alone. Comments poured in like prayers. "My mother kept quiet for 30 years. Today, she spoke. Your story saved my sister. I thought forgiveness was weakness. Now I see it's the strongest thing we do." I read them at night, with tea cooling beside me and gratitude rising like a second heartbeat. Matthew's future. Matthew turned 17 the year the channel crossed 10 million subscribers. He'd grown tall, serious-eyed, with the same steadiness his father once lacked at that age. He wanted to study psychology. "People lie because they're afraid," he told me once. "I want to help them stop being afraid." On his graduation day, I looked at him, handsome, confident, compassionate, and saw the result of every painful truth we dared to confront. When he hugged Isadora and said, "Mom, you made me who I am," her tears fell freely, and behind them, in a quiet pew, I whispered a thank you to the God who'd turned our ruin into harvest. The pilgrimage. I decided to visit the place where everything began, not the Paris hostel, but that small alley with the number 14. It had changed. The mechanic's shop was gone, the corn vendor replaced by a flower stall. The old wooden door had been painted blue. A young mother lived there now, rocking her baby in a cradle by the window. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. The house no longer belonged to secrets, it belonged to life. I left a single white daisy at the doorstep and whispered, "Thank you, Isadora. Thank you for answering when the door knocked." The final interview. When I turned 80. A documentary crew reached out. They wanted to create a film titled The Woman Who Chased the Truth. During the interview, the director asked, "If you could speak to your younger self, the woman washing dishes that morning, what would you tell her?" I smiled. I'd tell her to listen to the tremor in her gut. It's the voice of wisdom disguised as fear. And I'd tell her that courage isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to keep asking questions. The camera light glowed red again like Yvonne's that first day on. I realized how life comes full circle. The letter from the convente, final letter, arrived that same year. The handwriting was shaky, as if written by someone older, slower but familiar. "Dear Stella, I've been helping children here for years. Sometimes, they remind me of Matthew, their eyes, their laughter. The sisters say forgiveness is a seed that must be watered daily. I think of you every time I pray. Tell Matthew I am proud of him, even if I will never see him again. Love, Araceli." Folded it gently, and placed it beside her first letter. No bitterness remained, only the echo of what we had all learned, that truth can destroy, but it can also cleanse. The porch and the sunset. I sit most evenings on my porch, the same place where this story began and ended. The jacaranda still blooms purple, just like the year Ivan's voice came through the phone line and changed everything. Stephen and Isadora visit every Sunday. Ivan calls from the sky between continents. Matthew brings me tea and tells me about his patience, how truth still heals, one confession at a time. Sometimes, we sit together in the twilight, not talking, just breathing in the quiet peace that took a lifetime to earn. I look at my family and think, the world tried to teach us that deception wins, but it doesn't. It only delays the inevitable triumph of light. The final words: if you're listening now, wherever you are, know this: the truth will hurt you before it heals you. It will take from you everything you thought you needed, and return only what you can't live without. But once you face it, once you tell it, once you live by it, too will never again be afraid of the dark, because you will have learned, as I did, that the dark was only waiting for you to strike the match. So tell your story. Tell it loudly, or tell it softly, but tell it. You never know who's listening, or whose life you might save by simply daring to speak. And if you ever doubt that your voice matters, remember this: mine began with one phone call, one question, and one trembling impossible. Now, it has reached the world. The truth set us free, and it always will.